The film starts with a teenager, Stanley, who gets hit by a pair of sneakers that appear out of nowhere. He stops in the middle of the road and wonders why such unfortunate things always happen to him. Stanley thinks it's due to his family's curse of being unlucky, which his grandfather once told him about. But before he can give it another thought, the police arrive on the scene. They arrest him for stealing the shoes which were donated to charity by popular basketball player Clyde Livingston, known as Sweet Feet. On their orders, Stanley takes them back to his house for a search, but the police are surprised when they see his crazy family. His father, who's an inventor, is busy finding a cure for foot odor, while the rest of the members keep distracting him. The people find a poster of Sweet Feet in Stanley's room and think of it as evidence, while the family discusses how to handle the situation. The next day, the whole family appears in front of the court for the hearing. Unfortunately, Stanley is convicted of stealing the shoes and is sentenced to 18 months at Camp Green Lake, a detention facility. After arriving at the camp, he is stunned to see that it's only a dried-up lake run by not-so-supportive staff. He is introduced to Mr. Sir, the assistant to the warden, who begins teasing him by explaining that he would have to survive with little to no water because there is a shortage of supplies in the area. He also warns Stanley about running away because he will get stranded in the desert and eventually die of thirst. After giving him his new clothes, Mr. Sir tells Stanley that he will be spending his days digging holes. Soon, camp counselor Dr. Pendensky escorts Stanley to meet the other inmates known by their nicknames. The group includes Zigzag, X-Rays, Squid, Armpit, Magnet, and a little boy named Zero, whom everyone makes fun of. Pendensky also mocks Zero by telling Stanley that the reason behind his nickname is his stupidity, as his brain is capable of nothing. After making the rounds, Dr. Pendensky hands over Stanley to Armpit and orders him to take care of his new fellow. The next morning, Stanley tries to talk to Armpit but makes him upset by calling him by his real name Theodore instead of using his nickname. Armpit scolds him and makes him promise that he will not repeat the same mistake again, as none of the boys like to be called by their real names. As the group gathers for dinner, Stanley tells them about the shoes and everyone laughs at him. But surprisingly, Zero knows that the shoes had a red cross on them. They are shocked to hear this and ask further questions, but Zero does not say anything else. While spending his first night in his uncomfortable bed, Stanley remembers his grandfather telling him the reason behind their family's bad luck. He said that it all happened after their ancestor broke his promise to a fortune teller. Years later, Stanley's great-great-grandfather faced the consequences and got robbed by a woman named Kissing Kate Barlow, who left him to die in the desert, but he survived without water for 16 days. The next morning, the boys gear up for the job of digging holes. When they arrive at the site, Mr. Sir tells them that if anyone finds something precious, he will get a day off as a reward. After hearing this good news, they get to work, but Stanley's fellows continue to make things difficult and keep increasing his job. At this moment, Stanley is seriously cursing his bad luck, which is plaguing his family because of his ancestor Elia, who used to live in a village in Latvia. One day, he saw a beautiful girl named Zeroni and instantly fell in love with her. He pleaded with Zeroni's father for her hand in marriage, but the man refused because Elia had nothing to offer in return as compared to her other suitors. Disappointed, Elia met a fortune teller who gave him a piglet and advised him to take it to the top of the mountain. She asked him to raise it well and present it to Zeroni's father. Finally, she told him that after Zeroni's father agreed, Elia had to take her up the mountain to make her drink from the same water source, or his family would be cursed for the rest of their lives. Elia acted upon her advice, and a few months later, he presented the piglet to Zeroni's father, who asked his daughter to choose between Elia and another man. She hesitated to make a decision, which angered Elia, and he walked away, abandoning the thought of marrying her. He decided to leave for America and completely forgot about his promise of taking Zeroni up to the mountain. As a result of his carelessness, his family got cursed, and now Stanley finds himself in this hell. After digging his first hole, he comes back to the sleeping area where Mr. Sir saves his life by killing a lizard that was about to attack him. He then warns Stanley about these wild creatures that are capable of killing anyone. Although Stanley finds it hard to adjust to the camp where they even lack basic facilities like proper food and clean water, he does not share anything in his letters to his mother. The next day at work, Stanley finds a fossil and gives it to Mr. Sir while thinking he will manage to get a day off. but Mr. Sir tells him they are not interested in fossils. As he gets back to his hole, the boys share that the entire area was once owned by the warden's family. Centuries ago, the lake was full of water. In the local flourishing community lived an African-American onion seller named Sam, who was in love with Catherine. A wealthy guy named Charles Walker also had feelings for her, but she was not interested in him whatsoever. At the camp, Stanley continuously faces mental torture. One day, he loses his calm and picks a fight with an inmate, but the boys rescue him. They eventually accept him as part of the group and even give him the nickname Caveman. With time, Zero and Stanley become close and often work together. At one point, Stanley is reading a letter from his mother when Zero reveals that he cannot read anything and asks Stanley to teach him, but he politely refuses. After a few days, Stanley finds an old lipstick with the initials KB carved in it. Before he can think about what to do with it, Armpit snatches it and decides to give it to Mr. Sir, but Stanley asks him to wait until the next morning so he can get the entire day off. The next day, Armpit presents the lipstick to Mr. Sir, who instantly informs the warden about it. The warden, Louise Walker, comes down to the camp and excitedly announces to refill everyone's canteen to celebrate the find. The lipstick belongs to Catherine, who was a schoolteacher, and she fell in love with Sam while he fixed her roof. This was unacceptable for Charles, who continuously got rejected by her. Once, he spotted the two of them kissing, and in his anger, he burned down Catherine's house. Catherine tried to seek help from the sheriff, but he ignored her requests. He also tried to misbehave with her, but she fled. Frustrated, she rushed to the lake to warn Sam about everything, but Charles shot him in front of her. After Sam's death, it never rained in the area, and the lake eventually dried up. Enraged by the injustice, Catherine killed the sheriff and left the town. Back at the camp, Magnet steals sunflower seeds from Mr. Sir and shares them with his fellows. Soon, Mr. Sir finds out about it and returns to the camp, but the boys quickly hide them in Stanley's hole. After Stanley takes the blame, Mr. Sir escorts him to the warden's house. In her house, Stanley finds different newspaper articles and wanted posters mentioning Catherine Barlow. He realizes that the initials on the lipstick they found earlier were of Catherine Barlow, who turned outlaw and started robbing people after what happened to her. Later on, after listening to Mr. Sir, Louise gets upset and hits him with the nail polish while mentioning it contains the venom of a rattlesnake. She does not say anything to Stanley and asks him to return to his hole. Upon returning to the camp, Stanley finds out that Zero has already dug up a hole for him. His gesture impresses Stanley, and both become friends from that moment. Mr. Sir, who is still angry with him, refuses to refill his canteen, but Stanley does not care as he is still busy thinking about the posters. When Zero offers him some water, Stanley tells him about the posters while sharing that Catherine was the one who used to kiss people before killing them, and his great-grandfather was one of her victims. Stanley eventually starts teaching Zero after he reveals his real name is Hector Zeroni. Zero also shares that his mother went missing a long time ago and he could not find her despite hiring some private investigators to locate her. A few days later, there is a fight between Stanley and another boy, but Zero chips in to help his friend. As he tries to choke the guy, Dr. Pendensky intervenes and stops the fight. The case is reported to the warden when they learn that Zero always helps him out. When Stanley discloses he has been teaching Zero because he thinks he is a smart guy, Dr. Pendensky again makes fun of Zero, which angers him, and he hits him with a shovel before running away from the camp. Mr. Sir blames Stanley for his escape and says if Zero dies, his blood will be on his hands. The next day, while Mr. Sir is busy refilling the canteens, Stanley seeks help from a new inmate and steals his truck. Although the truck gets stuck in a hole, Stanley manages to escape from the camp and go in search of Zero. He soon finds Zero under an abandoned boat, but neither of them have any water left. Thinking that they won't be able to survive in the desert, Stanley tries to convince Zero to go back, but he refuses. The duo decide to climb up to the nearest mountain, but after traversing a treacherous trail, Zero gets exhausted and is unable to walk. Stanley picks him up on his back and takes him to the top where they discover a water resource. After quenching their thirst, they feed on some wild onions, but Stanley does not realize that he has accidentally lifted the curse for his family. Back home, his family celebrates after his dad finally discovers a cure for foot odor. Meanwhile, Stanley and Zero spend some time on the mountain regaining their strength. At this point, Zero reveals that he was the one who stole the shoes from the charity. He tried to run away with them, but as the police found him, he threw them off the bridge and they fell on Stanley's head. Zero apologizes to him for sending him to prison, but Stanley tells him it was destiny that brought him here. After a while, Stanley's attorney visits the camp and requests the warden to let her have a meeting with her client. After Louise declines the request, she threatens to sue her for not taking care of him. At the mountain, Stanley tells Zero that he is glad he stole the shoes because he initially blamed it on the family curse that always led him into trouble. He also feels the need to dig one more hole. While he doesn't understand this urge, it's not wrong because years ago, Catherine told the Walkers that she had hidden all the money she stole as a criminal in that dried up lake. She asked them to dig up holes if they wanted to find it. After that, she killed herself by getting bitten by a lizard. Following his gut, Stanley comes back to the camp with Zero and they start digging another hole. They eventually find a chest, but before they can open it, Louise and Mr. Sir show up at the site, but don't jump because the hole is filled with lizards. The lizards, however, don't bite Stanley and Zero because they have been eating wild onions. Dr. Pendensky reveals that Stanley's lawyer has succeeded in proving his innocence, but they cannot let Zero leave. The duo learns that Louise and her group set up this site where they have been using the inmates to dig holes for them to search for Barlow's treasure, but they never found it until now. As no one can get inside the hole, the warden decides to wait until the next morning, thinking that the lizards will kill them by that time, but nothing happens. Meanwhile, Stanley's attorney comes over with rangers and Louise claims that Stanley and Zero ran away from the camp, but the attorney discovers them in the hole, surrounded by the lizards. Louise blames Stanley for stealing the chest, but Zero stuns everyone by showing them that the chest has Stanley Yelnats carved in it. It proves that the chest belongs to Stanley's great-grandfather and Catherine stole it from him before burying it in the ground. The attorney asks Stanley to come with her, but he refuses to leave without Zero. After hearing this, the attorney asks for Zero's file. When they fail to retrieve the file, the attorney issues an order to examine the camp. One of the officers recognizes that Mr. Sir is actually a paroled criminal named Marion, while Dr. Pendensky is also not a doctor. Both get arrested by the rangers. Soon it begins to rain, which overwhelms the campers because it happened for the first time in over 100 years. The boys celebrate the rain while Louise and Mr. Sir watch in astonishment. After saying goodbye to their fellows, Stanley and Zero leave the camp with the attorney. Stanley's family opens the chest filled with jewels, promissory notes, and other precious items. Stanley decides to share half of it with Zero while revealing that he is actually Zeroni's descendant and has a big role in finding the treasure. With the newly acquired money, Zero hires private investigators again who eventually find his mother. The Yelnats and Zeroni families become neighbors and begin enjoying their new stress-free lives. If you enjoyed that recap, I got a good feeling you'll enjoy this one too. Click on the video on your screen for more.